Look at invisible.
Hey, good morning.
Doesn't clean it.
Good morning to our
children.
To our panelists. It is 7:10 on Acadiana's Morning News, and time for Wingin' It Wednesday.
What?
It's like our family dinner of the week.
Yes.
More dysfunction.
Family. I have the theme for family feud in there.
More dysfunction than Sunday dinner. Anyway,
Lots of
Carol
gravy and
Ross,
mashed potatoes.
Stafford Barnett, and Warren Caudle all in this morning with a ton to talk about. This isn't on the official list, but Brian Pope remains in jail. It has been a recurring theme for several weeks. What's going to happen? Will it happen? The latest is that he has asked to serve out the rest of his jail sentence on house arrest, and it doesn't look like that going to happen.
I think
Stafford, you
everybody
can start this off. We'll go through.
I think everybody in jail is like, man, it sure would be cool to do this at home. And who enjoys doing Sudokus in a 10 by 10 all day?
When you could do it by the pool.
When you could do it by the pool.
Yeah. Hey, Warren, what's your thoughts?
First thing, what I want to touch base on is that somebody texted me the other day about Donald Washington being appointed the city interim marshal, and there were two light bulbs that went off in my head. And one of them is, what in the world are you doing appointing him to be the interim city marshal? And secondly is, what in the world would he even accept that job? And then, of course, I delve a little bit deeper into it. Why would you appoint him? That man has got credentials out the wazoo. He was a high-profile prosecutor for federal government.
Yep, U.S. Attorney.
Over half of the state of U.S. Attorney, over half the state of Louisiana, which means that he was in effect in charge of all of the FBI and that part. And so my point is that is there somebody who is wanting something looked at inside that marshal's office? So you appoint a high-profile, pristine person to go in there and actually do it. And why would he accept it? I think that that's probably that may very well be is why he did accept it, is because somebody somewhere really wants things looked at inside that marshal's office. Don Washington is about as independent as it comes down to a man of impeccable character and credentials.
All right, Carol, your thoughts?
Agreed. I was very reassured when I saw that they had appointed Don Washington. I've known of him and known him for a long time, and just think he's an exceptional human being. I mean, we're very fortunate to have this gentleman go in there. Now, Warren, I don't know what Warren's talking about, but I'm glad he's there. I don't care why. I'm just glad he's there. We need a strong, steady hand in the marshal's office. But I will tell you, and I've said this several times, I think it's a vestigial operation. I don't think we need a marshal's office. I think if we have a separate division within the city police, it is a city marshal. And I think we can eliminate a lot of the duplication and bureaucracy and these kinds of scandals. Why not put them under the city police? I've had callers who seem to know better than I do that there are only certain functions that the city marshal's office can do.
Yeah.
But I still...
But rules can be changed.
If only we had representatives that could fix that.
Okay, so wrap this one up, and then we're going to move on to what is going on or not going on in Baton Rouge.
Did you see on the report last night that they threatened one of Marshal Pope's former attorneys, I think he's a former attorney, Grayson, threatened to sue Fox 15 for a story that they had done?
Really?
Something, yes.
Yeah, Grayson got fired from the DA's office here locally for being a scumbag.
Grayson.
So, I mean, look.
That's for the official reason written on the paperwork.
The opinions of this man are not of this radio station.
I want to echo their sentiments. I agree. I think Donald Washington, it's nice to have somebody in that office whose integrity is impeccable.
It seems like an adult in the room.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
But here's the other thing. I'm about to get some information, I hope, about the amount of taxpayer money that is being spent on Marshal Pope's legal defense.
Yeah. We will look out for that. Let's
only
move on.
Only one bad part about Donald Washington. He was at West Point, not Annapolis.
Oh, stop, Warren.
All right, let's talk about Baton Rouge and the work that I would say the work that got done, the work that didn't get done, deals that were not made. We are still facing an issue as far as state finances go, and really staring down the barrel of another special session, which will happen, we believe, the last few weeks of the regular session. Things will kind of switch over. Warren, we'll start with you on this one. What are your thoughts? I mean, I love to be hopeful that something was going to come out, some kind of deal was going to come out of this thing, but here we are.
Well, I mean, if you were hopeful that a deal was going to come out of this thing, was it going to be a good deal or a bad deal? The only deals that were discussed, as far as I'm concerned, were bad deals. I mean, look, Stafford has said over and over, which I totally agree with, that legislators are elected to go up there and make the hard decisions. And that's something that Louisiana legislators, and in fact, so many politicians throughout the country, do not do. They go up there and they do the easy things. The easy thing is keep spending more money, keep throwing it away on the same old thing, keep propping up all the brother-in-law deals, keep giving all the contracts to these outfits who absolutely do nothing except suck cash out of people's pockets, and on and on and on. You know, let the roads just fall apart, let education go straight to hell, and on and on and on. So now we have a governor who comes in, offers nothing new, offers more of the same, says, well, we're just going to give you a steroid shot and you'll feel better. But you're still going to have cancer, you're still going to have this, you're still going to have that, but you won't feel it. And that's what he keeps saying. And so the House comes up. They have some real plans that they came up with, proposed some common sense plans that didn't even see the light of the day, and then they wound up backing the Senate version. I mean, you know, that of the budget, and you know, it's just more of the same. When you're sitting there digging yourself in a hole, what's the first thing you need to do? Stop digging, you know, and just keep, you know, don't do the same old thing that you've been doing. Failure after failure after failure, and that's what we're doing in this state, and how this governor can sit there and try to blame it all on the legislature when he was in there and voted for, what, 6 out of the 8 general budgets that he now claims is the really problem of everything. So anyway, I've had it with him.
Carol?
Well, I do agree with Warren about that. I do think the governor needs an intervention. I would send him to Wisconsin. And I would see what Scott Walker did, who had just as bad a problem as we have right now, and turned a $1 billion deficit into a $2 billion surplus, and dealt with the situation that he had. That was even worse because he had a situation with public employee unions, you know, camping out at the state capitol, et cetera.
That was a big part of it.
Here is the problem. The governor said at the very beginning, and I have the letter from Taylor Barra to the governor saying, we had this meeting, we discussed these things, you asked me to do this, here's what I suggest. You wanted a plan? Here's the plan. 2-page letter, 3 pages at least of attachments concerning the basic things that he wanted to do, which was some spending caps, you know, some spending reforms. Let's put it that way. The checkbook.com, get that put through. And the third thing was the real driver of our deficit, which is the governor's own Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion, about $900 million. Budget fiscal cliff, about $900 million. Anybody watching here? So I think he's sending some really good reforms, not hurting anybody. Elderly, those indigent, those people who cannot do for themselves, still protected. But those who are able-bodied, do some work reform and some other reforms that people. And the governor absolutely turned around and said, you sent me nothing. I had nothing to work with. He knew going in exactly what they were going to propose. Now, when they turn around and say the only reason they're doing this is to hurt the governor, how about this? How about they're listening to their constituents for a change? And they held the line because their constituents had their back and said, don't do this.
Stafford, some have said a bad deal would be better than no deal at all. Your thoughts?
Well, I this may sound a little shocking, but I'm actually a little bit in agreement with both Warren, with both of y'all. So, look, here's my take on it, because I had to do some soul searching on this, and I feel that I don't like blaming a party, and I don't like blaming an individual. I like blaming a system, and I feel that the system in Baton Rouge is completely dysfunctional and broken. And if you look at how we generate funds and how the cities act as pass-throughs, and how, you know, when the city does one thing, somebody just goes to Baton Rouge and gets a tax rebate to get the money back, and it's a broken system. And it's evident in the amount of bills we now have in Baton Rouge calling for a constitutional convention. There's 6 of them. And it seems like Neil Abraham's bill is going to be the one that potentially gets through. So my hope, and Warren took the words out of my mouth, this is the hard job that has to be done. And what emerges on the other side of that has potential to affect real change long term. And the frustrating thing for me is that we've cut, you know, I want to say at one point when I brought it up to, I think, Stuart Bishop, if I'm not mistaken, years ago, I said, we keep cutting higher ed. And he looked at me, he goes, we cut $1 billion from LSU. He goes, you see them going anywhere? He goes, you see anybody else taking these hits? And and the funding has shifted, right? We've seen colleges raise their rates to go to school. We've seen them eliminate some programs that weren't necessarily good, or at least make them profitable, right? So it's time that we got serious about this. My hope is that if we can get this constitutional convention actually brought to fruition, we can emerge the other side with some things that make sense. Potentially the continuing of TOPS, some funding for roads, lower taxes on sales taxes, higher taxes on property taxes, keeping money inside the district, keeping money for schools inside the district, and get to this Texas model or whoever else, right? Mm-hmm. One that actually works.
Well, it took us to the end of the first special session for what we hear is going to be another marijuana legalization bill that some have hopes will help us solve these budget problems. We'll get our panelists' thoughts about that next on Wingin' It Wednesday. 7:24 now at News Talk 96.5. KPEL, our favorite part of the week, Wingin' It Wednesday. Panelists are all here, and we're going to bring up the weed.
the devil's weed.
Well, there are some lawmakers who think that maybe this would be the answer. Washington State projecting a $700 million revenue boost through next year. Is it something we should consider here in our state, Carol?
Well, isn't that wonderful?
Take a stab
isn't
at
that
it,
wonderful?
or a puff of it.
A government solving its own fiscal irresponsibility on the backs of vulnerable people who are willing to smoke dope or want to smoke dope. I think it's the wrong thing. I don't mind decriminalizing for, personal use and that kind of thing, because our jails are filled with a lot of people who probably shouldn't be in jail. Let them pay a stiff fine, put them in an education program, period. I don't see why we need to have all kind of people in jail just for smoking dope. Having said that, I don't think the government should be participating in promoting a bad behavior that in the long run will be deleterious. I had the sheriff on yesterday, and he said he's talked to law enforcement people in Colorado, and he said, whatever you do, they told me, whatever you do, don't let them legalize pot. Don't let the government get involved in it. Yeah, it's producing a lot of money, but law enforcement is seeing the effects of it, and they don't think it's not a pretty sight from the perspective of the people who have to enforce the laws. So decriminalization for small amounts, possession of small amounts, I have no problem with that. Let's get serious about and let's get realistic about it. But as a government, I just don't think it's a good idea. There are all sorts of avenues for corruption and, for really... In Louisiana. Come on, it's Louisiana. I think we wrote the book on messing things up.
Stafford?
This is the first time I've heard Carol be big government on a subject in a long time.
Big government? I don't want government involved in this.
The government is involved. They're locking people up for marijuana every day. And let's be straight. The longer it's illegal...
I said decriminalization for small amounts. Stafford?
One day you'll learn my name.
Stafford.
At least she doesn't call you Brian Pope or Mark in the afternoons.
I said Stafford.
So here's the thing. There's an age gap where there are people who still believe some of the bad information that's out there, and there's people who have experimented with it. And let's be clear, marijuana is not a gateway drug. Nobody's overdosed on it. And here's some reality as well. If you go into a liquor store and go to the actual liquor section, you can grab 3 bottles and kill yourself, point blank. People die from alcohol poisoning on a regular basis. People die from prescription drug overdoses at an alarming rate right now. And marijuana has never killed anybody. So I imagine that there's some frustration. I encourage you to do some research, Carol, because marijuana has never killed anybody from the effects of marijuana, period. Nobody has smoked so much marijuana they died. Ever. And that's a fact.
Stafford, I tell you what, you are amazing. You have so many facts at your disposal, and every once in a while they're right.
So are we saying this one is not right?
So I'll get back to my original point. The states that have legalized it, all the doomsdayers have been proven wrong. Colorado had to give checks back to its own people. They're funding education at a high rate. And let's be real. We've learned, or you'd hope we'd have learned, that prohibition is bad. And on alcohol. We learned that all it does when we made alcohol illegal, it funded gangs, and when we took the government out of the process, these guys, when they had a problem, went into the streets and sold it with guns. When we legalize this stuff, you have a problem. These guys put on suits and handle it in court like a big boy.
What do you make of the question, though, and then we're going to get to Warren, about the impairment side of it? About, weed may not have killed someone, but impairment, you get in an accident.
You're right. And look, this isn't, hey, let's legalize weed and then let's all go sit in the parking lot and smoke a joint, right? It's the same thing. There needs to be some education behind it. I wouldn't be okay with legalized marijuana and then walking into, a grocery store and somebody smoking a joint, right? There's a time and a place, just like there is for alcohol or anything else. Do it at your home. Find a place in the evening to do it. But let's be real about this. The fact that alcohol, which kills thousands of people, thousands and thousands and thousands of people, just from consumption, right? And marijuana has never killed anybody from consumption. And that's a fact, Carol, whether you like it or not.
Warren,
that's an issue.
Go ahead and I'll take a stab at this.
I'm okay with legalizing it. That marijuana today, and it has been for 45 years, the number one cash crop in Kentucky. It has replaced tobacco, and people use it by the pounds, and that 3/4 of the lawyers I know smoke weed, 22% of the doctors I know smoke weed. And on and on and on. And, people call it a gateway drug. Hell, the gateway drugs are alcohol. There's no question about that. More people start off by mind altering stuff by getting drunk with wine or beer or whatever than they do with anything else. Now, I've made statements on this program before about you never see anybody laying in the gutter throwing up from smoking weed. I told that one time, and somebody called me and said, I said it on there, and then somebody called me and said, I don't know if I'd say that today. Because and this is what I think is kind of funny, is because that due to genetically modifying or breeding plants, that they have created some really, really strong varieties of pot. And I understand if you go to California, those dispensaries where they sell it, is that they got all of these different varieties, and said some of them will literally knock you in the dirt. And so, of course, then they got the candies, the cookies, and all of that stuff where you're supposed to eat a half a cookie and not 3 cookies, and on and on. So, there are these problems with it. But on the other hand, there are laws against driving impaired. There are laws against all of these things. And so, that I'm going to go back and say, let's just enforce those laws. So,
Amen, brother.
The biggest problem that you run into right now, though, is you don't have a ready way of detecting whether or not somebody has smoked a joint driving down the road like you do with alcohol, where they do the breathalyzer or whatever. Mm-hmm. And if they could do that tomorrow, then I'll guarantee you they would all be in favor of it, because then they could just sit there and dream about how much money you can take in with roadblocks and a simple little, sniff this, blow on this, blah blah blah. So I think we ought to go ahead and just legalize it, because the industry of drugs today has corrupted everything. Justice Scalia said the worst act ever passed through Congress was when they criminalized drugs on a federal level. He said it trivialized the federal court systems. He said it should have been left up to the states and local communities, and I agree with him.
I think it's important to note, too, that every state that has legalized marijuana has seen a reduction in opioid overdoses. And I think it's also important to note.
I don't doubt that.
It's also important to note the great things that some of our veterans are finding, who've had some potential PTSD or injuries over in or traumatic brain injuries. I know that the traumatic brain industry group in Louisiana has been a vehement supporter of medical marijuana. And look, let's say they don't get
marijuana is one thing. Don't we have that already in Louisiana?
No, it's coming, but we don't have it yet.
Well,
what we've done is we've limited it. We've limited it to certain diseases.
But they do that with all prescriptions. You have to have a reason for taking it.
Correct. But let's look at Colorado. Let's let that determination be made by the doctor and not by legislators, right?
I agree.
So we've narrowed the scope to say you can cover X amount of diseases, right? But you can't cover it for some other stuff that we see it may be working with, right? So like child seizures is not one of them, but we know if you've seen the Charlotte's Web TED Talk, we know that it has saved some lives. And what ends up happening, the saddest part about that whole story is this little girl goes to California, gets her life saved by medical marijuana, and then is landlocked. She can't travel with her medication because it's a federal offense. She can't go anywhere, and the cost of living is so much higher there than it is anywhere else. So
it is not the end of the conversation. I think we'll continue to see it come up every time we have a budget gap. Whether it happens or not remains to be seen. 7:33 on Wingin' It Wednesday. Coming up, we tackle some changes to food benefits, what a lot of people would call food stamp benefits. We'll talk to the panelists next about some changes we looked at. 7:36 now at News Talk 96.5. KPEL, hey, do you have a tally on the taxpayer money used for the Brian Pope defense?
Hot off the presses.
I was about to say, because the phone almost jumped off the thing because I think the number's so astronomical. What's the number?
Someone who should definitely know, primary civil and including the forfeited suspensive appeal bond and public records defense. I'm glad everybody's sitting down. It's in the range of $385,000.
Legal defense.
And I'm gonna get the documentation.
Wow.
That does not include his criminal defense.
We'll listen for more this afternoon on
that was pro bono,
the Rush Report.
Jeez, what a crook.
Anyway, let's talk about the food stamp changes here. There is a proposed bill that could change the way able-bodied Louisiana adults without jobs who don't have dependents could see their benefits change. Stafford, we'll start with you again on this one. Then we'll make our way down the line.
I'll make this super short. The proposed change seems to be in effect because we keep writing a waiver around the federal guidelines, and the federal guidelines say that we should stop giving out some of that money at a certain time, but we've always created a waiver at the governor level down, I think since Jindal, because of our unemployment rate. And I'm honestly slightly ambivalent to this. I haven't heard a good reason to stop doing it, and I haven't heard a good reason to keep doing it. So if it can solve some of the problems and potentially force some people to go back to work, I mean, that unless if the person's injured, right, and that's why they can't work, get on Medicare or Medicaid, right? But if you're able-bodied, there are programs out there, especially through the welfare program, you can go back and get some more education if that's part of the issue. And I can promise you that with what we're seeing in the rest of the state as far as unemployment levels are, there's some opportunity for you to go make some money. So I'm kind of okay with it.
Warren, I think the key in this is without jobs and without dependents. Your thoughts on this potential change?
Well, that I don't know. Kind of like the old saying goes, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Stafford brought up something about if you're injured, disabled, or whatever. You look around today at how many people out there are disabled, young people who, that you go to Social Security office, you don't see anybody in there with gray hair. Hell, they're all in there between 20 and 30 years old, and that, they now come out and said 72% of the military-age population in Louisiana does not qualify for the military. And I talked to an Army recruiter the other day. I asked him, I said, is that right? He said, yes, it is. And he said that so much of it, a lot of it is because of obesity, but he said there's also a lot of it is because that parents have pushed these kids to be special needs kids. Oh, you got asthma, or you got this, or you ADHD, or you this, or you that. So we drug so many kids in school, they come up and then now they've got a history of mental problems. They got a history of this, a history of that. And he said, and so many of those things disqualifies you from joining the military. He said, on top of that, he said, you'll be surprised at how many of them flunked the test. And the test used to be something like on a third grade level. It was almost impossible to
write your name on this paper. No, I'm just kidding.
But it was just about, which of these two things go together? And it had a hammer and a nail and, and a crawfish and a bird. And, these were pictures. And so, there's problems that need to be solved. Maybe this is a step, one of the first steps in the right direction.
Carol.
Let's hope so.
Well, it's kind of like, glossing on the whole thing, because really under federal rules, they can already, if they're training for a job or a volunteer or that kind of thing.
But the state has the waiver. I think that's the state has gotten around it for however many years.
Well,
I think
the state should have. I think the state should have a right to decide these kinds of things, it's not one size fits all. We do have that higher unemployment. This has been going on for decades. And I don't see the point in changing this right now. Maybe reform. I mean, every single federal program needs reform. Let's face it. If we could devolve all of those wasteful programs back to the states. Of course, the states don't want the responsibility.
I was going to say, even on a timeline, let's review this in 5 years and renew it. But a lot of times there's no end.
Right, and it's been going, and they never ever come back and really look at how many of these laws are on the books. Look at all the amendments to the Constitution. But I disagree. I don't think I would do a constitutional convention. You have no idea what you're asking for.
Do you think back to that? What we were talking about before with the Constitutional Convention? There are a lot of people who say the problem with our budgeting, just to kind of go back a second before we move on, is the Constitution and not necessarily the spending. Wouldn't you need the Constitutional Convention to make those updates to the...
some legislators... Let me just say this about this bill that Morris proposed would give the legislature some power over this, as well as the governor. Because right now it's the governor kind of as an administrative rule and that kind of thing. But in terms of Constitutional Convention, the ones that have filed or have talked about filing have cited specific articles, 3 specific articles dealing with education, healthcare, and spending. Specifically.
I guess we'll see. All right. Some surprises to some last night as Texas went to the polls yesterday in their primary vote. A lot of folks are looking at that as maybe being an indicator of what the midterm elections would look like a little bit later on this year. We will get an update.
Warren, one of your fans is probably listening right now. His name is Brian, so tell him good morning. He loves your stories.
Good morning, Brian. I hope you have a great rest of the week.
I think he's going to love your which of these two go together story. He probably
could you even could you recreate that? Was it a hammer, a nail, a crawfish, and what?
And a bird.
And a bird. Okay. Unreal. All right, 7:42 now.
The good news is Warren passed a long time ago.
Yes, he passed.
and
7:45 now. Hey, an update from a loyal KPEL news junkie, Pam, who says traffic is backed up on E. Broussard because they're letting a barge pass under the Vermilion River. She also editorializes a bit and says whoever decided to do this at this time needs to be shot. So thank you to listener.
I'd cross that bridge.
I've never seen it open.
And I was telling my wife about it the other day because I saw a barge on it. I said, I thought that was downstream. How'd they get that up here? And she goes, they lifted the other day. I was like, no way. That thing's been bolted together for years. Apparently it still works. I never
knew it went up and down.
And they test it on a regular basis. I know that because I used to live in that area. They used to test it on a regular basis. I don't know if they still do.
They tested it this morning apparently for something.
Bad news. Bad news.
There was a barge at the gravel yard.
At the gravel, yes. Yeah.
And
yeah.
Anyways, so if you're
let's
driving that
do
way.
that at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, exactly.
Bridge on that river, though, right? Going north.
Now, what you
technically, the bridge at Camellia Boulevard is designed to be. It's not
designed, but I think that it's been declared a non-navigable river from somewhere below there.
I think it's south. I thought it was.
It must be south of Broussard because they have that huge gravel yard there.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Texas primary.
Oh, and by the way, watch out for this. We should put up a camera.
Yes.
Motion activated when they have that roundabout finished on 733.
Oh yes, that's got to be another issue.
Oh baby,
it is going to
because you're feeding from
give the Vero Cliff run for its money.
Oh my God,
they call it a super roundabout. Carol, get your words right.
Yes.
Super roundabout.
I'm ecstatic for that thing.
We'll see what happens.
Oh, I am too. But until they get the whole thing 4 lanes both ways,
they're not 4 lane it both ways. I thought
it's the 2 and 2. There will be a 2.
No, what I'm saying, I'm talking about the road. I'm not talking about the roundabout. The roundabout's going to be 2 lanes from what I understand, but the road is still
so what's your
1 lane either way.
What you're saying is whenever you're late for Wingin' It Wednesday and we call you can say, I'm just in the middle of the roundabout. I can't get out, Rob. I can't get out.
I'm not even close to that.
All right,
Thank God.
let's do a couple quick hits on the Texas primary last night. We'll start with you, Warren. Big indicator of what's to come later on this year?
I have really no idea. I mean, I looked at it and see what happened over there, and it's just kind of a mixed bag of tricks. I think that, that some people won that they didn't think would, some people lost they didn't think would. Who gets excited over primaries, unless you live there? I mean, I don't know.
Politicians.
To be totally honest with you, I didn't even pay any attention to it. I did think one thing that's kind of unusual, though, is that here you have a 1/10 of 1%er who is going to be the Democrat nominee against Ted Cruz in the U.S. Senate race over there. And he is the Jared Kushner of the Democrat Party. His wife is the daughter of a billionaire real estate mogul in Texas, and so he's going to be running against Ted Cruz, who is not exactly an outsider to all kinds of high-flying finances. His wife formerly worked for Goldman Sachs, et cetera, et cetera. But I would say that he's going to have a tough time beating Cruz in the state of Texas. And, they talk about the Republican primary. The Democrats got 1 million votes. The Republicans had 1.5 million or something. It hasn't been very long ago. They didn't even have a Republican primary in Texas. We don't realize that, but just a few years ago, they didn't even have a Republican primary in the state of Texas. All the bloodletting was done in the Democratic primary. In the governor's race, you'd have 12 or 14 candidates running, and 3 or 4 of them were high profile or whatever, and the big money was all in there. So anyway, I don't think it's fortuitous on anything.
All right, Carol.
Yeah, I don't think it's predictive yet, but the Democrat Party has been targeting Texas. They want to turn Texas blue. That's their big plum. They get Texas blue, it's all over for the Republicans because it's a huge state and growing. But as Governor Abbott said, we're happy to have you here, but just don't try to change our culture here. We are Texas, and we want to stay Texas. So we'll see what happens. But I think Cruz definitely has the edge. Of course, he was on the air immediately with a commercial slamming O'Rourke. Why does he call himself Beto? He's Robert O'Rourke. He said, well, my parents always called me Beto since I was a kid. I think he's from El Paso. Yeah. And he says everybody in El Paso calls their nickname for their kids Robert is Beto. Well, whatever. It's really it's hard to predict. But as Warren said, I think the when you can scare anybody into thinking that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer will take over again, I think you have a good shot at winning.
Stafford.
So the big news out of Texas, and I'm not so concerned about Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz, is that while they did have 1 million votes on the Democrat side and the Republicans had 1.5 million, last primary Democrats had 500,000, so they've doubled their presence in Texas. And while I don't think you're going to see Texas turn Democrat, I think what you're seeing is the stage being set for what's going to happen for the midterms in November. So there's a groundswell, but people saw Democrats really do the wrong thing for the presidential race, right? They forced Hillary Clinton on everybody, which nobody wanted, and they in turn got Trump elected, right? And they've ran on a platform of identity politics by hammering. Hillary Clinton's slogan was "I'm with her," right? So not bringing out issues that are relevant to the American people. If Democrats wanted
making things great again.
Well,
because that's something a lot of people identified with.
If Democrats would get out front and say, hey, and they're not going to agree with me on this, of course, but hey, we want to have health care for all. We want to legalize marijuana and run on a platform of education. Say we want to have the best education system in the world and pay for 2 years of college, right? Extend the public education system from 18 to 20.
There's at least substance, is what you're saying.
But at least run on a platform of something, not anymore of we hate the Republicans or we support this identity or this identity or this identity, because it's not really about that anymore. It shouldn't be about that. Identity politics are bad for society. So if they can find somebody, and look, Beto O'Rourke has been able to put together a campaign without taking a single penny in PAC money. And I think that's the new trend you're going to see from the Democrat Party is this push to say we don't want any corporate PAC money involved in the process. We want to find people who are not bought and paid for. So, and if they can do that, I think they got a good chance of sweeping in November. I think they've got a good chance of knocking off Trump during his reelection campaign.
All right, Warren, you go, and then we'll wrap up with Carol.
Yeah, about the only way you're going to get rid of the PAC money is to get people like that guy O'Rourke, who's a billionaire. Father
who doesn't need the PAC money.
Who can go in there. Yeah, that's right. But the one thing that came out of Texas that I thought was really interesting, it's kind of like some of the Republican primary races here where you had a woman from Washington who moved to Texas to run for Congress, and she was quoted in a magazine, in an article one time, of saying, I'd rather have all of my teeth pulled out without anesthesia than live in the state of Texas. So she's over there running for Congress, and the Democrats came out en masse and with a big campaign against her. but yet she still now is in the runoff.
She's in the runoff.
And
Yeah,
so-
boosted her numbers. She was quoted last night saying that that if there's one thing everybody should know is that Texas doesn't like being told what to do. So when the DNC came out and hammered her, it actually boosted her numbers.
Carol, wrap this one up.
Well, Stafford, I don't know where you've been all this time, but that's exactly what the Democrats have been promising. Free education, free health care, free this, free that. We're going to take care of you from, womb to tomb. And it has not worked because it never does work. There's not enough money in the world. And the government that can promise you all of those things certainly can take away all those things and very rarely can afford all those things. And we're seeing that now.
I think you took what I said as I'm supporting those ideas, and I need to be clear about what it is.
I took it you said exactly as you meant it.
I said that the Democrats
if
need
they
to put
did
together.
this, if they did that, if they did the other, they've already done that.
So the Democrats need to put a platform together where they run on issues and not on identities, because I believe that identity politics is bad for the world and it's bad for any party.
Those were the issues. The ones you cited are exactly the issues that they ran on and have run on for decades.
If that's what they ran on, then Bernie Sanders would have been the nominee. And Bernie Sanders was not the nominee.
No, because it was stolen from him by Hillary.
Exactly.
Stolen.
Exactly.
That doesn't mean they didn't have all those things
you.
in their platform. Read their platform. I mean, it's free this, free that. We're going to take care of you.
We need to get to a break here. Come back to wrap up Winging It Wednesday on this big March 7th, 2018. Stay with us. That is some after 9 talk, guys. That is some after 9 words. We don't use those before 8. Anyway, hey, we're here to wrap up. And, I wanted to take a little bit of time during Winging It Wednesday. Carol, you've been, around the block in this area in Acadiana.
Don't tell them how many times. That's all I'm asking.
How many times. I said around the block, not around the sun. Marcel Citron, it was someone who was important to a lot of people. We lost her this week. Bernie and I got a chance to meet her, and Bernie's known her forever. I had never gotten a chance to meet her and the family till a junior achievement event that we hosted last year. And, you kind of look at an era where, guess what, now, it's not that it's easy to run a nonprofit, but it's not such a far-fetched idea when you see a need that you do it. When she did it, though, it was really far-fetched.
Oh, and let me tell you, she did so many things that nobody knows about. Helping people get started in business, delivering boxes of food herself to people that she identified as needy. This woman was she is a saint. Her family is right. She's in heaven right now, helping to organize something up there, I'm sure, because she was an amazing person. She was a fellow Rotarian. We saw her every week and just were amazed at the number of things that she got accomplished. And as she said, small things with love accomplish a lot.
I loved the stories her kids said, holidays were never like everyone else's holidays. Like on Christmas morning, they couldn't get up and run to go open presents because she already had the car loaded up
ready
for
to
what
deliver.
They were going to go deliver, in the area, which is cool.
Exactly.
Hey, Warren, did you ever cross paths with Miss Citron?
Yeah, not. I mean, I met her on 2 or 3 different occasions. I think the thing that really stands out in my mind about her is that, I didn't keep up with a lot of the stuff that she did civic-wise, but the thing about it is that she inherited that business from her father, and in most cases, those family-owned operations usually don't succeed over
the second
generation or whatever. And the woman took that thing and she ran with it and she built it, and into a really, really a superb organization. Now she had a son or 2 in there with her, but still, you have to give the credit to her is that she did not let the thing die. She did not let it wither on the vine. She kept it and she ran it, and she did a marvelous job of that. And I think that to use an old cliche from back in the 60s is that she was a class act.
Well, guys, appreciate you giving of your time each and every Wednesday with us. Each Wednesday morning, we get to talk about a lot of ideas, talk about a lot of different things.
Like the new do.
It's radio. No one cares about my fly new
he
haircut.
Looks cute.
I care.
You know what? Stafford noticed first thing when he walked in, so thank you for that. All right, it's 7:59 now at News Talk 96.5. K-Bell. Coming up, our interview with Ralph Peters. Coming up on Acadiana's Morning News. Stay with us this Wednesday,
I'm not
March
hating on
7th. Your full weather and traffic forecast, or weather forecast and traffic update are coming up right here on KPEL. But first, your headlines. A suspect wanted for the 2016 murder of his ex-wife in St. Mary Parish is back in Acadiana. Russell Richard Jr. of Baldwin was arrested last Wednesday in Oklahoma. Authorities in St. Mary Parish had been looking for him since the body of 45-year-old Rennell Lockett was discovered near the intersection of Highway 90 and a Baldwin Cut in Baldwin back in 2016. Upon his arrest by Oklahoma police, Richard was awaiting extradition on a hearing on the 16th Judicial District Court warrant for failure to appear on the charge of simple battery. Richard was booked into the St. Mary Parish Law Enforcement Center yesterday on an outstanding warrant for second-degree murder in the death of his ex-wife. Family and friends will remember a renowned Lafayette humanitarian and businesswoman today, founder of FoodNet and the mind behind Acadiana's biggest food drive. Marcelle Citron passed away Saturday night at her home. Citron started FoodNet, a nonprofit food bank in Lafayette, back in 1987. She was well known as the matriarch of the Hub City Ford franchise right here in Lafayette. The New Orleans native took over the family business from her father, who started the Lafayette Ford dealership. For her dedication and giving back to her community, her business acumen, she earned such awards as the Lafayette Civic Cup, the Farm Bureau Freedom Award, the Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis Award for Service, and the Jefferson Award, the highest award for community service in the nation. Her funeral services are being held at St. John's Cathedral today at 1:30. And finally, the push for a transparent budget process failed in Baton Rouge, but Lafayette Parish Schools are set to vote on a similar plan this week. The board members will take up this issue at the regularly scheduled meeting. Voters and business leaders supported the plan to create an easy-to-search website to track state spending. The site would have been based on a program in the state of Ohio, but it failed to make it out of committee during the special legislative session in Baton Rouge. Board member Justin Centani says LPSS has teamed up with the same developers who built OhioCheckbook.com, the platform that would show every expenditure from utility bills to district salaries. If approved, the site would be called LafayetteCheckbook.com. The issue comes to a regular vote at the board meeting tonight. It is 8:07 now at News Talk 96.5 KPEL.